Good morning, beautiful people. I hope you're having a great day so far. I want to talk about dieting. Protein specifically. Well, macros in general. How should you set up your diet? Well, first things first is you need to decide how big of a deficit are you going to do. Now, this is going to depend on a couple of factors. First of all, are you resistance training? This should automatically be a yes. Because if you're not, start. You're going to lose so much more fat-free mass, so much more muscle if you're not resistance training. You need to provide your muscles with stimulant. You should already be, I'm just going to assume that you are if you're watching my channel. Number two, how lean are you currently? The more body fat that you have, the steeper of a deficit that you can go into. So we have a meta-analysis from, it wasn't that long ago, I believe 2023, and they looked at essentially what is the optimal calorie deficit to be in to minimize your losses, your fat-free mass losses. And the reason why they say fat-free mass instead of lean mass is because we don't really have a solid way of distinguishing between what is fat-free mass and what is lean mass, because there's glycogen, water. So there's other things besides your body. There's more in your body than just fat and muscle. I know it's crazy, but we don't have a good way to distinguish, okay, this is exactly muscle. And because even with a DEXA scan. So fat-free mass, what's going to minimize it? 500 calories is what they found. Kind of funny, that's the old adage. It's just like with protein, the new meta regression that happened, they found the same old adage, 1.6 to 2.2 is good, solid range. And that's the old adage of 0.8 to 1 gram per pound. So it's kind of funny when old bodybuilding adages and sayings get proven by the literature. It's like, damn, they really knew what they were doing back then. It's the same with how a lot of bodybuilders were training in the pre-steroids era, in the silver era. They were training pretty damn smart, pretty effectively. They were doing 3 times a week frequency. They were going to failure. They weren't doing super high reps. Their exercise selection was pretty solid considering what they had. You know, this is the 30s and the 40s. So, but anyways, 500 calorie deficit was found to be the optimal amount. But an important note about this meta regression is they didn't look at protein. Protein intake was not one of the covariants that they looked into. So, and they didn't, this was just across all diets pretty much. And they found 500 calories. So if you are optimizing things, if you're resistance training, if you are adding, if you're eating an adequate amount of protein, then you can probably bump this. I know you can bump this, just anecdotally. Oh, anecdote, shut up. So 500 calories seems to be the sweet spot. But then again, what is your current body fat percentage, right? If you're super lean, I would not recommend doing a super aggressive deficit. You're already, the leaner you are, the less margin of error you have. You need to be much more careful that you're not losing lean mass, because when your body, the way that all of this works, the way that dieting works, is your body has energy needs, right? And if it's not getting that energy from food, it's going to take it from your body. Of course, this is what fat is for. It's stored energy for later. But if you already are lean and you don't have a lot of fat, your body is going to start taking some muscle, taking some lean mass from you. And so I think it's a good idea, and this is what I normally do with my clients, to taper your deficits. If you're a larger human, if you have a higher body fat percentage, you have room to do a pretty aggressive deficit right off the bat, because your body has a lot of fat that it can take from. So your margin of error is a lot bigger. You can go super aggressive with your dieting if you're a larger human. I wouldn't recommend it if it's the first time that you've ever dieted, because it's going to suck. But I would say starting with that 500 range is pretty good. And this also depends on your dieting experience, right? If you've never dieted before, just go 500 calorie deficit. It's pretty easy, pretty pretty good to coast on, right? And if you want to go aggressive, you can go pretty much as aggressive as you want. The most aggressive deficit that I've ever ran was, my maintenance is around 3,000 calories. And I was eating, I believe, less than 18. I think it was 11 or 1,200 because I'm eating 1,600 right now. And this is aggressive. And yeah, the most aggressive I think I've ever done was 11 or 1,200 calories. And that sucked. That was just protein, pretty much. Just protein. The only carbs I had was a little Rice Krispie before the gym. That was awful. But I lost a ton of weight. And I didn't lose any muscle either, because if you're gonna do something, the other thing is the length of the deficit. So how much fat do you have to lose? Because in that case, I didn't have a ton of fat to lose. So I was only in that deficit for like 3 weeks. So if you have a lot of fat to lose, you're gonna want to do a smaller deficit. So once you've decided how big of a deficit you're gonna do, pretty much 500 calorie. If you want to really coast, then you could do like 200 or 300. But most people don't like dieting, and it's not good for your body to constantly be in a hypocaloric state. So I would opt for 500 to even up to 1,000, depending again on how much fat you have to lose, and then taper it down as you get leaner. So for protein, how much protein should you have? Like I said, the meta regression, found that you need to do 1.6 to 2.2 grams. And this is for most people. So this is for people that are in that low to moderate range of losing fat-free mass. And if you're doing a less aggressive diet, you're not at then you can probably stick with that 0.8 to 1 gram per pound. If you're doing a very aggressive diet, and because the only factors that you need to take into account with how much protein you should be having is how lean are you, and how long and how aggressive is the deficit. So if you're super lean and you're doing an aggressive deficit, that protein should be pretty damn high. So like I'm talking up to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. And you could even go higher. You could go, I think that is probably, again, from this meta regression, there's no upper bound. They found a linear relationship, and they didn't find a cut point like in other analyses. Or in other, I don't know, to be honest, I don't remember if the previous two were regressions or analyses, regardless. In the other metas, they found at least a point where the slope sort of stopped. And in this regression, they didn't. And I think that's an important thing to note, because yes, there is extremely diminishing returns, but they did not find a cut point, and the linear regression model is what matched the best. So the more protein you ate, the better chance you had of gaining muscle, the less chance you had of losing muscle, fat-free mass again. And so, but we just don't have enough studies with super high protein amounts to really make a good guess on this, because so many low protein was a very popular thing for a lot of these studies. Nutrition studies are already really hard to do. Just think about the practicality of it. Someone has to come in. We always want it on trained subjects too. So you need a trained subject to come in, and for 8 to 12 weeks, so 2 to 3 months, they need to train exactly to your training program. They need to drop their current one, do what you're telling them to. They need to eat exactly how you're telling them to, in a group that might not do anything. So this experiment might not prove helpful for them. It actually might prove detrimental. And all of that to get paid like $100. Maybe they're doing it for class credit. So the practicality of nutrition studies is already really hard. That's why the sample sizes always suck, because it's hard to get people to do it, especially in trained lifters. And that's always what we want, including me. I'm the one who's always, bitching and moaning on the sidelines saying, but this is in untrained lifters. I want it in trained lifters. But I understand the practicality limitations. So that's why we don't see an upper bound. And they also didn't do a categorical analysis which is essentially where they put things into baskets. So they would have said, oh, between 1.6 and 2.2, and then what is 2.2 to 3 or something like that. And the reason why they didn't do a categorical analysis is because they have you have a continuous variable, right? Protein intake. So if you do a categorical analysis, you're saying that in this example of us saying so it would be 1.6 to 2.19999 and then 2.2 to 3. You're saying that 2.19999 is more different than, like, you're saying that it is substantially different than 2.2 than 1.6 is to 2.1999. You're saying that those are more similar than 2.2 and 2.1999, which is just not true. So you can do categorical analyses on continuous variables. However, I don't believe that it's a good idea, again, because of that logistics issue. So your protein, this has been a long yap, I'm sorry. The protein, if you are aggressive deficit and you're really lean, jack it up. There's no downside of having higher protein other than the opportunity cost of putting it into a different macro. So the opportunity cost is whatever calories you're allotting to protein, you can't put towards carbs. Your fats, when you're dieting, I like to set them as low as possible, to be honest. Set it at 0.33 grams per pound. So a third of your body weight, fat. And when I'm talking about body weight, I guess I should be saying lean mass, right? Lean mass is what you really want to be targeting, or at least maybe not lean mass, but do your target body weight. So, because we don't want to be changing our macros around the whole time, right? If you're 250 pounds and you want to be 170, that's what your fighting weight is, then you don't need 250 grams of protein to start off. You sure as shit do not need 325 if you're doing a super aggressive deficit. So you can always opt for more. Right? Again, there's no downside, but go with your lean. The target, they have a whole table in the meta regression. It's Refalo 2025 if you guys want to look at it. And they have the lean body mass or the fat-free mass calculations. I just forget the numbers. It's easier for the body weight because that's what people always want to know anyways. And yeah, so set it off of your target body weight is a good way to do it, because most people don't know how much fat-free mass they have, and most people don't know how much body fat they have, because you can find out how much fat-free mass you have. You can just look up FFMI calculator, fat-free mass index, and put in your height, your weight, and your body fat percentage. But more likely than not, this actually kind of helps for, everyone's always fatter and smaller than they think they are. It's just the truth. A lot of people would look at me when I finished my building phase and I was 230 and they would say, man, he's pretty lean. No, I was like 20%. They would not say, oh, he has 40 pounds to lose. Yeah, I did. And everyone's always like, oh, I just need to lose 20 pounds and I'll be good. No, you need to lose 50. It's eye-opening if you've never done a deficit to see how much fat you really have on your body. So, and how small you are. You think you have a ton of muscle until you cut down and you're like, wow, that was just, I had fat sheathing it. But again, so put in your body fat percentage. If you underestimate here, no shame. It doesn't really matter, because that's just going to increase the amount of fat-free mass that you have, which is going to increase the amount of protein you think you need. So for that, and then go with 0.33 grams per pound of your target body weight. So a third of your target body weight for fats, and then fill the rest in with carbs. And this is where you need to just experiment, right? Everyone wants the secret muscle math to how am I going to get the biggest? How am I going to get this deficit and get jacked at the same time? There's not a secret muscle math. There is for each individual person, right? But it's different for each, because you might feel amazing and your hormones might not be tanked by going even lower than 33% of your body weight in fat. I know I dropped my fat lower and I just watch it, right? I get my blood work done. That's an important thing. If you're going to do a deficit, I would highly recommend getting your blood work done. Do it before, during, and after. Because if you're going to cut your fats really low, you need to keep an eye on your triglycerides. Look at your cholesterol. Because you might, in my case, my cholesterol ratio, the LDL to HDL, the good to bad cholesterol, got tanked because I'm on a super, super low fat right now. So I increased my omega-6 supplements, and now I'm good. So there's just different things that you can do. So find out for you, maybe you didn't lose any lean mass doing at 1 gram per pound, but maybe someone else lost lean mass. They need to do 1.5 grams for protein. And this is where you need to do that individualization. And that's why having a coach is great. First of all, a coach is going to tell you what your actual body fat percentage is and tell you how much you need to lose. So then you can find out what your lean body mass is, or at least your fat-free mass. Again, there's a difference. Water, glycogen, it's not huge. But you can find out what the difference is, and you can get accurate numbers. But again, this doesn't need to be a super accurate process, right? At the end of the day, as long as you're eating less than as long as you're burning more than you're eating, you're good. You're going to lose weight, right? We're just getting into the nitty gritty of how you can do it and not lose muscle or gain muscle, right? I am of the school of thought that you should be able to gain muscle throughout your entire deficit. If you're losing muscle, unless you're getting sub 10%, if you're getting sub 10%, then yes, you will probably, it's damn near impossible to get that lean and not lose any muscle. But you should not be losing a substantial amount still. And if you're going from 20 to 10, you should not lose you should be gaining muscle that entire time. At least maintaining. The other very important thing that they found in this meta regression, and the last thing that I will leave you with, is that protein only explained 55% of the variance in fat-free mass retention and growth. 80% of this variance was determined by other variables, right? And the only other variable they didn't take into account was their training programs, because they took into account other covariants. They just didn't end up putting it into their model because it didn't really change the model. So things like sex and study length. There was another covariate, but they looked at a lot of other covariates, and pretty much the only one they didn't look at was the training programs. And it's because the more covariates you get, the more that you complicate the model, and you can end up with type 1 false results, false positives, false negatives. So they didn't need to do, you can't control for everything in a statistical analysis, essentially. But 80% of the variance was coming from their training. So if your training sucks, another reason to get a coach. If your training sucks, you're going to lose lean mass, and your training matters more than your protein. So train hard, number one. Don't train more than you need to. People always ask, should I lower my volume when I'm cutting? No. You shouldn't have your volume at a place where you need to lower it when you're cutting. That just means you're doing too much. Anyways, because your recovery is really not blunted that much by being in a deficit. Yes, muscle protein synthesis peaks lower, and muscle protein breakdown is higher. So you have your overall protein in terms of your anabolism is less. And you have IGF-1 signaling and mTOR signaling goes down. Regardless, right? You can still build muscle, you can still hold on to muscle, but your training program needs to be good, and you need to have your diet optimized. I didn't even talk about cardio. If you want to, do it. You don't need to, right? But moving more will lead you to eat more. That's why everyone's TDEE maxing. That's why I'm doing it. That's why I'm getting 20K steps and doing cardio, because I'm a big boy. I like to eat. And that's what I will leave you with. Again, just to recap, 1 gram per pound or 1.5 in a deficit, okay? Make sure you're training hard, and the higher you're gonna need more protein depending on how aggressive your deficit is. How aggressive your deficit is depends on how big you are and how much fat you need to get off. So essentially the same thing. And then put your fat at 1/3 of your body weight. You need it for your hormone and your brain function. And then fill the rest in with carbs. That's all I got. Peace out. Have a great day.